Hey, everybody. I'm Brett Kinsella. This is Gain, the Generative AI News Rundown. Today, we have news from OpenAI. Wouldn't we always? New chips, some economics associated with ChatGPT Plus and mobile apps. We also have Feature Week, Adobe. We're going to talk a little bit more about Canva, which we just touched on last week. We're going to talk about Spotify, Apple, a whole lot of other things. I hope you enjoy this. All right, Eric Schwartz, my
Hey,
colleague from VoiceBot.ai. How are you doing today?
doing well. Excited as always.
Great. I kind of feel like this is feature week because normally we're talking predominantly about foundation model companies, maybe some tech giants here and there. But this week, lots of features from other companies are sort of the top headlines. And I thought we would get right into it with our friends from Adobe.
Yeah.
So Firefly, a lot of announcements today. There's some others that we'll talk about later, but in particular, Firefly has some new AI models, including a vector model. Tell me about it.
Yeah. Adobe went hard on at their Max conference with all kinds of generative AI stuff. But yeah, I'd definitely say one major feature is three new models. Technically one major upgrade to their Firefly model, and then not only did they enhance the text to image engine, but they created, as you said, a vector model. So one that a way to combine its sort of advanced vector image technology with generative AI. So you can create vector images, you can turn them into other kinds of images. You can really do quite a lot with them. And their other new model is built around more the sort of marketing or publishing side of creating templates and helping keep and all the above really are built around not only better images but more consistency, helping customers maintain if they have like a brand style or just any particular product they're building. If they want to make sure that everything looks like it was coming from the same place, then it's a lot easier to do now.
Yeah. So one of the things that Adobe has done is it's worked on building its own models, which is a little bit different than what we're seeing most places in the market. So, how do you think that's ultimately different for Adobe going forward?
Well, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, Adobe's always been the sort of big name partner for these sorts of services, working with Microsoft and Google and so on, and really, it had carved out a really solid place between Photoshop and some of its other tools, that without being part of necessarily one of the big tech giants. And I think that having their own models means they have more control over the products that they offer, and it means they have more opportunity to use their expertise in these things to differentiate themselves from the sort of rapidly heating up space of synthetic media, and how generative AI can help with visuals and video and so on.
Yeah, I think control is a big part of it, and they're obviously large enough that they can afford this, and spread out over all of their products. The generative AI investment is probably more digestible than it is for some other companies. But control, knowing how the model's trained, what the data is, control over economics. Then, if they've got a third party model that decides to spike prices, one quarter, they could be in trouble. In this case, they have that. I think that's super important. And it does lead to some other features that they can enable. Uh, tell me how you think this contrasts with Canva.
Well, I'd say the main difference between maybe not so much the features themselves, but the way people think about Canva versus Adobe is that Adobe is, it's for the power users. It's like if you really understand all of Adobe's tools, the limits of what you can do are there's very few limits. And Canva's always been seen as more of a quick layman's not non-design professional tool. And with Canva's expansion, they're still building around those opportunities, those kinds of customers. And I think that Adobe, while not certainly not ignoring those customers, is very clearly thinking about companies that have a lot of content they want to produce and who have experts in how to use Adobe. So they really want to make it so those people who are already experts in using their technology can just have more features and more ways to manipulate those images and so on.
Yeah, and I think we look at Adobe Express, which is clearly a Canva competitor, and how much they're leaning into that, how much generative AI is part of that strategy. I think it'd be really interesting. The one thing we did start by talking about is Canva is dependent on third parties. I think they're using Stable Diffusion, or they're using. I'm pretty sure they're using that, not DALL-E. Stable Diffusion, so they probably have some control over that. But when you get to writing and some of these other things, they have less control. Plus, with Adobe going with Picasso, they just have a lot more flexibility in terms of adding video and other things. They can just source it themselves, as opposed to potentially, I think Canva's going to have multiple vendors to support all the features they're going to be rolling out.
Yeah, and you're correct by the way. It's they when they created their Magic branded text image, that was Stable Diffusion. They work with Runway for a lot of their video manipulation, and I think it's you can tell it's because there's Adobe, but then there's Adobe Express is how they think of it's a faster version of everything they offer, whereas Canva is built around here's the speed is a main draw for Canva users.
Yeah, absolutely. Shout out to Mikhail Stanislawic. He's out there. Hey, if you are watching right now, if you're in the room, give us a like on LinkedIn or YouTube. Please do that. But also just drop us a quick comment. Let us know you're out there. Feel free also to ask questions or make comments about what we're talking about here. We like to incorporate that in the show. Always fun. So I think when we look at Canva, when we look at Adobe, we're really seeing a specific market being transformed with generative AI. And it's not actually that these tools are the predominant tools that are being used, but we had essentially a fairly mature market that's all of a sudden in upheaval because we have all these new features that might draw some new people in, might keep them there. And as they develop more and more content and get more familiar with one of these platforms, less likely that they're going to switch out.
Yeah, and Adobe definitely has the benefit of has the talent base and the technical base to really exploit these generative AI in a way that not many of its competitors will be able to do without turning to third parties.
Yeah, absolutely. Welcome to Paul Sweeney, one of the more erudite people in the conversational AI and AI world. Delighted to have you here today, Paul. Thanks for coming. All right, so I want to get on to the next story. And this is, based on a conversation that I've had with a few people about the economics of generative AI, to charge or not to charge for generative AI. And we have here just on the screen a list of, I don't know, there's probably 60 different companies that have all since the beginning of the year added generative AI. Some are predominantly based on generative AI, but most of them are actually other types of, or they're existing application sets that have added. So some examples: Opera, Box, Synthesia, Discord, Adobe, we were just talking about, Rembrandt, Wix. All right, so there's a lot of companies that are here. But what's been really interesting to me is that some companies are charging, most are not for these features. So if you are an existing software company and you're Microsoft and you have this office productivity suite called 365, you're going to charge people $30 a month for the pleasure of using that solution. Google Duet, also for Google Workspace users, you're going to charge $30 a month. And beyond that, what we see is almost nobody charging an upsell, for their existing applications. And so that might be because there's such concentration in the market around Workspace and 365, all these productivity apps. I think that's pretty interesting. But the other thing might be that the other organizations, the other software companies, don't feel like they have enough pricing power to make the change. So the first thing is, just want to ask you that question. What do you think about this? People charging and not charging for existing software apps adding generative AI features?
I think that, this has always been the tension with software, is that it's relative to hardware, easy to upgrade, improve, expand it. But you have to make if you're selling it, you have to make a case for why you have to charge more for it, or you have to create a new a new tier of subscription or purchase. I think um, I do think a lot of it is like almost this psychological thing of where someone's paying a certain amount for a product, and if the product is still called that product, then it feels weird to be paying more for it all of a sudden, even with new features. Whereas if you add plus to it, suddenly it seems like, oh, it's an extra, therefore extra cost makes sense. I think that may be part of it. And I think it's also just what is it an improvement, or is it fundamentally changing the software itself? Is it adding a generative AI feature, or is it making a new product that involves generative AI?
Yeah, exactly. And so the other thing that I should point out is when we go to the native apps, so the generative AI native apps, where generative AI, like you said, is like, it's not just a plus up on what you've already using, but it is core to the functional benefits associated with the product. A lot of them have been able to charge, but not all of them, right? Or not all of them have tried. So ChatGPT has a free version, but you can also spend $20 a month for Plus. Claude, same thing, although it's not as clear to me like what the value. I know what the value is for using ChatGPT Plus versus a regular Claude is like you get a little bit more time, but I'm not sure that impacts many people. Perplexity charges $20 a month for a pro version. Then you get like access to GPT-4 as well, and those types of things. But Bing Chat, Google Search Generative Experience don't charge.
Yeah, and it's part of it is the technology, and part of it honestly is, I think, the interface itself. I mean, there are people who will happily pay $20 to OpenAI just because they find working with Bing to be particularly annoying, or really just find Microsoft products to be more hassle than they're worth, even though theoretically it's the same thing that they're getting from ChatGPT Plus. So I think that's part of it too.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so just along those lines too, one of the things I think is really interesting, the other place where there's a charge to use is it's the image creators, with the exception of Bing Create and a fairly generous allocation from Adobe Firefly, a less generous allocation from DALL-E from OpenAI. But Midjourney from the beginning has basically been charging after 25 free generations, and then almost everybody you're going to spend a couple cents per image on OpenAI. And then if we go to the stock photo sites, they're all charging. So one of the things and actually the stock photo sites are very interesting too, because their existing software solutions, or really marketplaces, they are charging from the beginning for all of this. I think it's like maybe economic necessity. I'm not sure that there's any reason to go there to generate your image, as opposed to just like generate your own on one of the specialty sites.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's also the element of, in some ways there is how the technology is used is still being worked out, or what's considered an appropriate addition to a product versus a new product. So I think how products are being charged, or how generative AI technology is being charged for now, could look in some ways very different in a couple of years, when it's shifted from like an exciting new feature to, for where it still persists, a necessity or a core component.
I think it's frankly, my expectation is that this is just going to be an expected set of features for most application providers. If it's not core to your business, it's going to be hard to charge extra for it. And so what they're going to wind up having to do is figure out how to implement the same level of quality of the features with smaller models, maybe open source models, just to improve the economics, as opposed to today where they needed to rush to market and they're basically all using OpenAI or something similar. Now, when we get into economics, I also wanted to talk a little bit about an article I'm working on right now about ChatGPT mobile app revenue. And I think there's some interesting things that our friends at App Figures have come up with. So first of all, we'll just talk about the mobile apps ecosystem in terms of downloads. There was like some breathless statements about ChatGPT is dying. It was just a fad because like over the summer the numbers fell off a little bit, but then they spiked again from a mobile app and from a website standpoint once school came back into session. But one of the things I thought was really interesting at this point right now, we have over 50 million. I think it's around 53, almost 54 million downloads between iOS and Android. Android is didn't launch as soon. It didn't launch till July. Well, partial month there. You can see on the chart they had about 2 million in the first couple of weeks, and then 8 million in August, 9 million in September, and they're tracking at about 2.7 million in Android this month. And that gives them about 22 million overall downloads on Android, whereas on iOS they're up to over 31 million. And what we've seen is there was a little bit of a dip in the summer, but the downloads seem to be up and very well could be up again this month. It's unclear to me, but I have a feeling that both of them are going to be a little bit off this month. The other thing that I thought I would point out is ChatGPT mobile app revenue. Topped about or is top 10 million overall. This is I'm showing some net revenue here as opposed to total revenue. So it's over 4 million if you think about the amount of money that the consumers are charging, because or the consumers are paying but then you have to figure in that the app stores are taking 30%. So if you look at right now, OpenAI took in last month a little over $3 million in revenue, net revenue, from the mobile app, which is, from what I can tell, a fairly small proportion of what they have. So I marked this between 700,000 and 800,000 paying users on mobile who have initiated payment on mobile, and that's probably out of about 4 million paying users overall, including people who have initiated payment on the online service. And then another really interesting thing is over 90% of all the revenue generated has been for mobile has been on iOS. So what do you make of this data that I just ran through?
I mean, it's to tie back to what I said before. I mean, there is a sense of flux, I think, that both in terms of how much demand there is for specific generative AI tools like ChatGPT and how much people are willing to pay for them. And I think, as we talked about before, it's the idea that ChatGPT's demise is imminent is very silly, but that doesn't necessarily mean that how it's sold or how it's packaged won't change. I think there's going to be a lot more experimentation before you can say, before anyone can say with utter certainty of, here's the moment where it's stabilized as a success or a failure.
Yeah. Well, another thing too is just to look at the economics here. It looks to me like less than 5% of all monthly revenue for ChatGPT Plus is coming in through mobile.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons where I think that the ChatGPT Plus is much higher on iOS than it is in Android is timing. So ChatGPT Plus came out on iOS in May. That was shortly after they implemented, or excuse me, ChatGPT's iOS app came out in May, shortly after ChatGPT Plus was implemented. And so a lot of people hadn't yet upgraded to the Plus version. And so just being in the mobile app or being introduced, maybe that was easy for them to do, a lot easier. Whereas by the time we got to July with Android, a lot of users had already, if they wanted Plus, they probably had already done it on the website. And so I think that'll be a really interesting dynamic to see how it plays out. And obviously OpenAI has a significant incentive to get people to get people to do it on the website so they don't have to pay the 30% VIG to Apple and Google.
And with the major, not everywhere yet, but like even just seeing some of the ways people are playing with the new ChatGPT or new and upcoming features of using visuals and voice and so on, I think it's there's going to be a major rush for people who happen to see the killer app, the killer use that they that makes it worth it to them to pay $20. I know I talked about it before, but like sometimes in public you encounter confusing public signage, and if you can just ask ChatGPT with your voice, what does the sign say? Can I park here? Then there's plenty of people who would rather avoid a parking ticket and pay $20 a month to do so just for
Yeah,
that.
great point. And this is one of the things that if you look at it, the revenue growth rate was in the 30% the last couple of months, but it was only 20% in September. And you can actually see that, potentially we're getting to, they've got over 50 million downloads. Are they going to get to 100 million? Like maybe eventually, but like the current trend line doesn't look like it's going to get there anytime soon. Uh, so the question is, what's the catalyst? Right? What is the next feature that gets everybody in? Like there'll be organic growth because they're a leader in the space and it's very useful. And they're going to add some features, which maybe will get some incremental interest in it over time. We'll get some of the existing users to go to Plus so they can get the access to the new feature. But is there like a new feature on the horizon? Is there something that you're anticipating will actually spur that growth again? So those they'll jump up to 30% or 40% growth.
Yeah, and there's always rumors of things like of hardware and new ways to bring generative AI or bring ChatGPT into spaces that it's just not doesn't go to at the moment. And well, personally, I think the current crop of generative AI hardware just sounds like you're wanting to make yourself a police state of yourself and remember everything that's happened to you every day. That doesn't mean, that's not to say that there isn't some version
A
of.
police state of yourself, so you can remember
I don't
everything.
like the idea of having a complete audio record of everything I said and everything that was said to me every day. I don't think that's necessarily something I want, even for training and
That
personalized
is a
internet.
very
But
interesting take. Like I haven't heard I can understand why from a privacy standpoint people might want that. But
yeah,
like it seems like it's more than that for you.
it's one of those things where I've always sort of believed that if it's on the internet, it's not private. You should just always act as though you're going to get, it's possible you'll get hacked and so on. But I think the idea of making that element a 24/7, or at least when you're
Yeah,
awake, part of
personal
your day feels.
surveillance.
Yeah, it's. I mean, like I'm very. I think not paranoid about online privacy, but in this case, I think it actually does cross a little bit of a line for me.
Yeah, I think very fair. Like this idea that like the state or bad actors or somebody might be able to crack into your personal surveillance database.
Or,
Uh,
or
but
even if
it sounds
not,
like
and
you just don't like. It's not just that though for you. It seems
well,
like
it's also. I mean,
you don't want the perfect record of your life.
right. Well, it's also even without that, if there's never any privacy issue, but you just train your personalized generative AI. I mean, again, because you don't, you yourself don't necessarily remember everything you've said and everything said to you. It feels like you could accidentally train generative AI to repeat things or act in a way that you would not want to be part of your um, interactions with technology. But I don't know. That's a whole other side thing. I will say that I think if there is something like that coming, especially in the near future, of ChatGPT in hardware, then and paying for Plus means that you either can use the tool or use the tool better. Then I think you'll see another rush of
Yeah,
interest from.
sort of back to that. Like you're done talking about this. I need to pull on this thread a little bit more.
Sorry,
Uh,
that's a lot
People
of
like
thing.
Paul Sweeney are in the audience, or if he's still here, he's the type of person who like to think about this. So if we have some sort of AI observation of everything that we do, speak, say, see, those types of things, what is the value of memory? Does memory then become a commodity?
I mean, that becomes a whole philosophical question of whether it's better whether memory will be a less important form of intelligence as opposed to the kind of intelligence that makes some people better at using search engines.
Yeah, I think I like the way you're thinking through this too, because a lot of people like look at this and say, "Hey, if I just had like some bot that observed me throughout the day, I'd be so much more productive because I wouldn't forget things. It would automatically remind me of things when I needed to, or if I had one of those surveillance lapel pins from Humane, when I walked into a room, it would say, Eric Schwartz approaching. Last time you talked to him, he had this news about his family,
Yep,
right? And so then you
exactly.
can follow up, and that would be, in a lot of ways, it would be pretty amazing. But for every gain in this space, maybe there is a downside.
Yeah, I mean, not to go too far down tangent, but now you're starting to sound like the that TV show Severance, where you literally have no memory of your time at work.
Oh no, I haven't seen them. I haven't seen that show.
Yeah,
So
the idea that when you're at work, you don't remember life outside of work, and when you're not in work, you have no memory of life in work.
oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, talk about compartmentalization
Yeah.
to the extreme. All right, folks, this has been fun. We're going to move on to our next thing. We're going to do funding. Before we do that, I don't know how many people out there know that we have. It's called AI News Daily, but it comes out 2 or 3 times a week, and it's just headlines. This is on LinkedIn, so if you do get this and you like it, you can let us know in the comments or share it with people. But we started doing this a little while ago on LinkedIn because frankly, there's just so much stuff. We don't have enough capacity to write about all of it. But
Yeah.
Eric
I
and
have
I
to
look
sit
at
sometime.
so many stories every week, and Andrew and Sonia helps out with us, and we just. I just felt like we should tell people, like, hey, here's some other things you should be reading too. There's some stuff from us. There's some stuff from other people, but we put this together as just basically a service to everybody. And we've been doing this, I don't know, we've got 30 or 40 of these out already. But if you just go to probably the easiest way to find it is just go to like my LinkedIn, and somewhere in the recent posts you'll see the Gain newsletter, and then you can just subscribe and you get it. So a little PSA there. Paul Sweeney has an interesting comment, as I knew he would. There's no such thing as memory. It's a process that reruns and recreates. Probably we need to think more about how we accrete short-term memory into long-term concepts. Well, see, this is now we're getting very deep. This is a problem that I believe that I have now, and I have talked to many other people who have this shared experience, that I have more trouble taking short-term memory and converting it to long-term memory than I used to. And I attribute it to overload of information, that there's just too many things all the time. Now, some people have said that there could be basically an evolutionary aspect to it as well. Is that, and it might have been you, Eric, that the brain knows that you can recollect that, like you can find it again because it's just information, and like you can go back and get it. And so it might just be saying, I don't need to take the extra effort of converting that to long-term memory because I know you'll always have access to it. Either way, it is a fact that it seems much harder to remember things than it used to be, and it has to be the digital overload of information we have.
Well, yeah. I mean, when's the last time you made an effort to remember someone's phone number?
I do know a few phone numbers still, but very few, very few. Yeah, and I don't. That's true. I don't take the effort to remember that because I can always look it up. So Paul Sweeney, great thing. Yes. How do we convert short term to long term? And like, what happens if an EMP, electromagnetic pulse, goes over the U.S. or Europe or your country, wherever you're coming in from? Would you be able to do anything, right? There's one thing just like living. Do you have electricity? Can you cook? Can you get access to food and those types of things? But what about other types of productivity? Because we don't have as much memory anymore, we rely on all these resources. If for some reason we didn't have access to them, like no electricity or no internet, would we survive? All right, we'll move on from there. But it was fun to talk about. Thanks for your comments there. Let's go into funding fountain, because generative AI land, boy, if it's about one thing, it might be about money, and that money to fund the sort of the next wave of activity. So the first one we have is a $50 million venture debt raise. So we'll just differentiate that between equity from Observe, and this is not Observe AI. This is Observe, and what they do is, essentially they do monitoring of applications, infrastructure, those types of things. It's dashboards. People think like panes of glass. It's like, how is everything working? If I'm having a problem, it creates a way for you to troubleshoot. And one of the things that's interesting, they did venture debt because, first of all, I think they've got enough growth that they might not have to give up the dilution. Plus, they're going to go for a raise next year, and at that point, that'll all just convert to equity. So eventually, it'll probably be equity. But the other thing about it is, I think they're a perfect example of a company that started out with generative AI as like a little help assistant, going through some of the help items. Excuse me. and that for the user, so they can find like support answers faster. And now they're starting to layer on more and more features. And I'll just leave it with this point before I pass it to you, Eric. Many people, when they saw generative AI, they saw ChatGPT or they saw Midjourney, and they're like, "This is amazing! It can create things." They weren't thinking broadly enough about the impact. How many people were immediately thinking, "Oh, geez, my infrastructure and application monitoring uh, solutions are going to be so much better because they're going to help me become more efficient in leveraging the technology to do my job better."
Yeah, I mean, it comes down to with Observe and with some other companies in the space, the idea that not only can generative AI produce new content or write things or come up with new things, it's that it can uh, learn to understand existing data. It can look for patterns. It can figure out where there might be an issue. It can work out when there's changes or where there's something coming in that might be cause a problem in some ways. And then the value, of course, then of generative AI being able to communicate that information in a way that is understandable to people who might be experts at solving these kinds of data analytics problems, but who may not necessarily be able to parse computer code for warnings about issues. So I think being able to keep a sort of nearly real time eye on data, on large amounts of data, and understand what's happening as new data is added to companies' databases is really valuable. And yeah, there's a reason that Observe is getting that 50 million. There's a reason that companies like Databricks or Cohere, there's never going to be in enterprise space, there's never going to be less of a demand for tools that can better organize and explain information coming in.
Yeah, absolutely. I just think it's a fascinating idea here that most people did not anticipate that this magic of ChatGPT or Midjourney was going to lead to these these transformational experiences for what are rather mundane and routine operational tasks within enterprises. And I think that's interesting.
Yeah.
Um, so we have a lot of we have a lot of interesting conversations about our last thing. Um, and so, Paul Sweeney talks about this idea that sleep plays a role. Neurophysical channel facilitates and restricts long-term memory. But Jürgen Gravestein says, I believe there's also brain research that suggests that intelligent people sacrifice long-term memory so they have more working memory, being able to take in a lot of information and solve complex problems. This all happens unconsciously, of course. So I appreciate Jürgen saying that, because obviously if I have problems with short-term memory, I must be one of those intelligent people trying to solve complex problems. Maybe that was not what you're saying, but that's the way I'm going to take it.
No, I think that's fair. I mean, to me, growing up as a kid, and I think a lot of people can relate to this, where there's above a certain age, people may think that a younger person is incredibly smart when what they actually are is good at data retrieval from the internet. It's like, which came first? Was it that intelligent people wanted to buy books, or that if you have a library, suddenly you have your intelligence includes whatever's in that library?
Yeah, and I think, like, if you think about intelligence as well, like pre-internet, access to books, certainly was very helpful. Access to teachers, but actually being able to use a library effectively was a really significant tool that made people like appear more intelligent. And I think that is the precursor of being able to use the internet more effectively.
Yeah, for me that was always, it's not, I don't remember everything I read, but I often remember where I read something that might be relevant to a topic that comes up later.
Got it. Well, that's another thing I have a problem with now, is remembering, because we have so many channels. Where did I learn that? Where can I find that?
Oh yeah,
Info?
attribution I think is probably the most important element of these new sorts of technology.
Every time I share something with you, I'm like, oh, did I do it in Slack? Was it a text message? Was it an email? Was it in a
Oh
Google
yeah.
Doc? Who knows, right? Okay, so let's get back to funding. You did a story on Gradient. They raised $10 million, and tell me what they're doing.
Yeah, so I mean, again, related to what I was just saying about companies always looking for ways to organize, explain information, and especially when they have a lot of information. And Gradient is about combining those two, bringing proprietary company information into giving it generative AI a boost, essentially, to improve sort of internal workflows. It gives companies ways to build or customize large language models for their internal use cases. It means that they don't need. We've talked about this before, where it's like you don't necessarily need the most parameters or the biggest data training set, as long as it's the right data. So if you can reduce the size of your model and reduce the amount of data that you're training it with, suddenly your costs go down and your speed goes up. And so there's a lot of interest in doing that, especially if you for companies that are reluctant to make the sort of comprehensive partnerships with Microsoft or Google that are usually required for them to access those tools.
Right. Well, I think one of the other things that I took from this story is they're going to make it easier for people to use open source models that they own.
Yep.
For all these processes. And like, having been through this a little bit with some folks recently, it's not trivial to set up your own environment. It's not trivial to train it and to fine tune it. And to the extent that they can provide that as like an external service where they control it and that type of thing. I think it could be very interesting, but I wonder if 10 million is enough. It seems like a very small amount for a company that's going to provide infrastructure and capabilities around, hosting custom large language models.
I agree. I would, if I had to guess, this is the company's just coming out of stealth. If I had to guess, they have a lot of there's going to be a lot of money coming their way just as soon as they prove the concept works. I mean, Wing VC is not small time. They're not going to just write a check and then walk away. They're going to be involved in building up the company itself. And I think that the fact that Gradient's founders have done AI development for some big brands like Google and Netflix specifically, I think this is the hey, we're coming out of stealth. Here's what we have, and here's our 10 million just to draw a few eyes. And then once they can prove that they're able to do what they say they can do, that's when the really big checks start coming in.
Yeah, fair enough. Seemed like a smaller amount than I would have expected to start, but yes, it could be that 2 months from now they're going to have 50 million. That's absolutely true. Okay, so you have another story around Ludo, $7 million AI agents.
Yeah, there's this. You talk about how when people think of generative AI, they think of ChatGPT and sort of the conversational agent is largely what it is, but there's more to agency than that. We talk about knowing and doing, and Luda is about building not just a generative AI like chatbot that you can talk to and get information from, but one that can actually perform tasks, and not just in the sense of organizing information or generating content, but behave in virtual environments, physics-based environments. Even if you're not someone who knows how to code or do animation, we talk about Roblox. This is not totally dissimilar to that, and including the potential for video games. But it's just this the idea of you're not creating a robot and writing down everything it will do. You're creating a almost a, I hate to use the word personality, but the personality in the sense of an AI agent that knows how to do several categories of things and will just go ahead and do them without having to write a code for each task.
Yeah, the real-time reinforcement learning I think is really interesting. So this idea that, like, today reinforcement learning is usually done after the fact, but this idea that like it'll learn on the fly in terms of the environment that it's in and like improve it. I think that's super interesting. So we'll see how that goes. All right, folks, this is the Generative AI News Rundown. We do this every week, and we've done this every week since February. talking about all the things that are going on in the industry. It's been really fascinating to chronicle this over time. So I appreciate everybody being here. If you are here, please like us on YouTube or LinkedIn if you're there. If you joined it halfway through and you want to see the beginning of it, you can. It's always on YouTube afterwards. You can go and watch the rest of it. And the other thing is some of these stories are on Synthedia, some are on voicebot.ai. You can always read those afterwards. So let's move on to Product Garden. And our first story today is OpenAI is looking to make its own AI chips for training and inference. And I think this is pretty interesting. There's a couple things that I would pull out. Is that there is this issue of a capacity constrained market. OpenAI has a market leadership position right now. And to the extent that, and then there's a lot of interest in this space, because there's a scarcity of NVIDIA chips, which are the predominant tools, whether it's the V100, A100, or H100s, because of the scarcity there, if people aren't moving as quickly as possible, that hurts OpenAI, because other competitors might be catching up, like if they have more time and these types of things. Plus, it's not revenue now, it's like revenue later. The other thing about this is the cost. So anybody who is trying to do this has to spend a lot of money on NVIDIA. That means they're not doing as many projects and these other things, or they're spending a lot of money with the cloud providers. And OpenAI hosts its own activity. It does its own work, and it's using NVIDIA chips, right? So it makes total sense for OpenAI to want to have its own chip. But this doesn't happen all the time, right? It seems like it does, because like a lot of the big tech companies, Google has their own chip. Microsoft is working on a chip, which we'll talk about in a second. AWS has Trainium and Inferentia chips. So, but those are tech giants. OpenAI is sort of the new tech giant. Like, are they a tech giant now? That type of thing. So I think that's like really fascinating. Any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, there's always this sense of with generative AI, there's this sense of like, oh, we're starting to run up against this sort of the physical limits, not so much in terms of what the software is capable of, but just in terms of how available the computing power is for a lot of companies. I mean, you can do a lot of amazing things with this technology, but that starts with having the chips that can process it, and that's why, as we've done so many times, NVIDIA is always going to be winning as long as they're the main and honestly, one of the very few sources for these chips. So if OpenAI wants to open, sort of accelerate what it's doing without having to continue to turn to NVIDIA and other chip makers, it's going to need to have control of its source material as well.
Yeah. So vertical integration is sort of a big thing. Apple brought it back into vogue. What was that, 20 years ago? Really, I mean, maybe before that, but really 20 years ago, a little over 20. They brought that in, and like, it does make a big difference. You have more control, more flexibility. So OpenAI, if it wants to do something, if it has its own chips, it never has to wait for the availability of chips in order to be able to do what it wants to do. It can control that. It could potentially sell them to others. It could optimize for its own models, so that OpenAI has a market share, mind share lead, maybe it has a performance lead. But like, if you start putting models and chips together, it could be even bigger. They could sell those to the cloud providers. It's really interesting. And if we think about the fact that OpenAI is trying to set a new valuation in the 80 to 90 billion range, up from 30 billion earlier this year, what would they use the money for if they went out and raised more money? Well, one of the things they might do is buy a chip company, and they are in a position potentially with that type of valuation to do it.
Yeah, and that we mentioned that rumor about them working on hardware ideas. Talking to Jony Ives, the guy who did so much for Apple's design. Building that hardware starts with having the chips to put in it.
Yeah, Mikhail Stanislawic also says maybe this is a race to lower latency. That could be true. I'm not sure that. So for sure, lower latency is important. And GPT-4 is a latency limited model, so it's like not appropriate for a lot of use cases because it is so slow. And so having a custom chip that made something like GPT-4 or the forthcoming GPT-5 a year from now or something like that operate better might make it more competitive and more important. So I think that's really, really interesting. I'm not convinced that OpenAI is going to get there before someone like NVIDIA, but it's possible. So that's like maybe my one thing. If Mikhail says, to be fair, for example, Bedrock sucks badly when it comes to on-demand latency, for example, for Anthropic models. I presume that's because they're running that on the inferential chips, and it's slower even with GPT-4, which is also interesting because Anthropic, even with that large context window, when you run directly to Anthropic, whether through its API or just like using Claude or something like that, super fast. So there's something about moving it into the Amazon environment, particularly probably running on the inferential chips, that slows it down. And in fact, if you found, Mikkel, that the latency for Anthropic on AWS is more, so it's slower than GPT-4, that's like a significant problem for Anthropic, I would say. Really, really interesting point that you brought up there. Okay, so let's move on to the next story. So we've got a couple here. First, we have Truepic, and basically they partner with Hugging Face, and so they're going to create this transparency for AI-generated content on for open source models, and so they've demonstrated that with a number of open source models that you basically be able to track provenance and say this is AI generated. And we also have a story from Adobe around content credentials. And we can talk about this with the context of text vector graphics, because I sort of talked about those. But content credentials also is really interesting. So there's a couple elements here. There's a lot of people who are working on provenance right now. That's not AI specific. If we're thinking about provenance of digital products or digital images or content of any type, a lot of people have an interest in that for IP protection, for security, just for to be able to do attribution properly. There's a lot of reasons why that has interest. And a couple of years ago, the Coalition for Content Provenance and Authenticity, C2PA, came about, and there's a couple hundred companies have joined that, and it's basically a standard or a framework for how everyone can work in concert on the internet in order to identify what the provenance of digital artifacts is. This is slightly different than the like AI watermarking. It's related, but it's slightly different because there's this other group of people that aren't worried about all those other mundane things about IP protection and security. They're just worried, am I being fooled? Is this human or is this inhuman type of a creation? So it can be used for that, and they're related, but it doesn't necessarily solve that problem right out of the gate.
Yeah, and it, as you said, it does have some limitations. If anything, it makes me think more about how there's a pretty widespread adoption of the copyright listings created by the Creative Commons copyright system. Far from perfect, of course, and involves some level of voluntary adoption, but it simplified a lot of these questions of copyright for images, certainly. And if there's a way to apply that to AI images, and in terms of making it as to make it the baseline for anyone who's not actually trying to use it for malicious means, if it just becomes the default that you put in those watermark, or not watermarks, but you put in what Adobe and its partners are doing, then I think that would be go a long way to streamlining, I guess, the sort of safety goals of a lot of generative AI synthetic media companies.
Yeah. So just a couple of things about this. This is not going to have a significant near-term impact. The vast majority of content is going to not have digital credentials, not going to have provenance information. And that's going to be true for a long time. This is only new things that you create now that you can add this to. So maybe there's a way to go back, but right now I don't believe there is necessarily to go back to like older things. Plus it's already distributed. So how could you do it? And so as a user, sometimes it'll be useful because you'll see, oh, this new thing that was created, I can see where it came from. But most of the time, it's not going to have any credentials. Therefore, you're going to be back to where you are today. I don't know what the provenance is. I don't know if this is authentic or not. So I'd say that so there's a long way to go. It's a little bit of momentum. They announced 4 companies: Publicis, Microsoft, um, Nikon, and one other company are adopting this, but it seems like a really, really slow adoption ramp.
I
So
think it was
I wouldn't get too excited. What?
No, I agree, but and then of course there's the unspoken element of when it comes to regulation. If Adobe CEO gets called up to Congress to explain what he's doing to help in this regard, then he at least has something solid, maybe not widely used, but at least something he can point to saying like we're trying to do it.
Yeah, I'm a good citizen. Yeah, that's what he could say. Okay, so we have a story here from ElevenLabs. They have a voice translation and dubbing tool. Tell me about that, Eric.
Yeah, so ElevenLabs, a while back, I think it's not long ago, a couple months ago, revealed an LLM that's designed to handle all kinds of translation and voice cloning translation. Essentially, the idea that you can hear someone who speaking English, and then you start hearing them hear the same voice, but now they're speaking Spanish, and it's not that they're speaking Spanish; it's that it's a synthetic voice. And ElevenLabs with this new tool is sort of making it a dubbing tool instead of the just transcribing something. It combines transcription with it combines transcription with translation as well as voice cloning, synthetic voices. So I was playing around with it. It's pretty impressive what it can do. I can imagine it being annoying to anyone involved in the dubbing industry if you're a professional voice actor who translates foreign films into English. Suddenly your competition is literally the original actor. So yeah, but it's from a technological standpoint, it's impressive how quick and easy it is to make.
Yeah, and like a company like Paper Cup is doing this, but it's not an fully automated system, right? So they actually have to go in and do additional work. So I think that this is super interesting, and I think it's great because, for example, there's so much information in English that's available digitally that is not available to people who are not English speakers. Not just non-native English, even non-native English speakers could probably benefit from this, but like just not English speakers. And so I think this could be actually really useful for a lot of people who are not English speakers to get access. And so that's one of the things that
and there's one of the things that the ElevenLabs has pointed out that they're particularly proud of and is impressed with that it's not just for a quiet narrator dialogue. It can be people talking over each other, and the tool will identify where the speakers are, separate out their voices, remove any background noise before putting together the new audio and then putting it back together. So people still sound like they're talking over each other, just in a new language.
Well, my prediction is ElevenLabs will make more from this product than they will from everything else that they have deployed so far combined.
Yeah.
Because this is just a huge market. And if it works as well as it seems to work, there's immediate economic benefit for people to adopt it.
Yeah, especially because they've implemented their own sort of watermarking system where if a voice clone is made with their technology, they can identify it. It's not like you can detect any deepfake, but a deepfake that somebody used with ElevenLabs technology for, they'll be able to spot it and deal with it that way.
Okay, we're gonna do winners and losers of the week in just a couple minutes. So 15 seconds. What happened with Opera this week?
Opera put their Generative AI assistant to give it a bunch of new features, and the most exciting one is definitely where you can upload your own writing and basically train an AI to write in your style. Ask it to write an essay or a social media post in your style, and it has the data to do so.
Absolutely. Okay. Hungry Root.
This is another one of those startups looking to give generative AI, bring generative AI into sort of mental health, the relationship health, and really boost how like a meditation app that can actually discuss what you're doing with you in a way.
Okay,
That's
good.
one way to think. It's not quite what it is, but it's broadly what it is. Yeah.
Spotify hints at generative AI playlists.
Yeah. Speaking of personalization, you can have one AI writing in your style while Spotify looks at what you enjoy listening to and talks to you about what you're interested in and puts together a playlist that's not just the usual. These songs are sort of similar to what you've listened to, but a much more specific, personal list of music and audio content that you'd enjoy.
Perfect. All right, and I'll take this one. Apple's far behind cloud providers in generative AI, says Needham analyst. Um, really good analysis by her. We wrote it up in Synthedia. What I'll say is we've been talking about that for a long time. So glad everybody else just confirming what probably people who are watching right now already know. Apple is really far behind. Don't believe all of these headlines that they're going to have some sort of great breakout because they've spent billions on this so far. This just isn't important to them. Okay, so winners and losers of the week. Who are your winners, or who is your winner, Eric?
It's I'm gonna have to say amateur artists or people who enjoy uh, making visual art but aren't necessarily very good at it. Suddenly, the things they see in their head. I mean, it's been building up to it, but with the new Canva stuff and the new Adobe stuff, even someone like me who cannot draw anything more complicated than a stick person, the kinds of images I want to make are now available to me just through describing it well, which is something I am good at. So it's exciting for people like me.
That's good. Winners, I'm going to say if ElevenLabs gets broadly adopted, I'm going to say non-native English speakers because they're going to have access to a lot more digital content than they have today, just because the economics of it are just going to be so much better for people to do the translation into other languages. How about losers this week?
I'm going to say there was a report about a reduction in investment in generative AI startups, but more specifically on the consumer side. So if you're an entrepreneur who had an idea for a generative AI consumer facing company, you're going to be struggling a lot more to get investment than if you were doing an enterprise app or anything else beyond what the sort of direct consumer market.
Yeah. And I'll say losers for this week. I'm going to say anybody who's trying to compete with ChatGPT as a standalone consumer app, because what we're seeing now is there's over 50 million downloads. There's a significant number of people who are paying for it. And I think that's going to be pretty sticky.
Yeah.
All right, folks, in the comments, let us know who you think the generative AI winners and losers of the week are. We really appreciate you coming out. Read Synthedia, read voicebot.ai, and come back next week.